Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Hey, everybody! Hello. Welcome.
Hey, everyone.
Welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, and I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And we're happy to be back with you. We took a small little hiatus, I think, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, let's quick just address that. I think.
Sure.
This podcast is a diversion. I mean, it's always been meant to be a diversion where, we just like talking about movies.
Right.
And
TV.
But obviously, with everything going on, we try to be all inclusive on this podcast. We try to amplify voices that don't always get headlines, I guess, or
Within the framework that we operate in,
yeah,
I think if you've listened to a handful of our shows, you'd see some evidence that we do that.
And we'll continue to do so, and if
sure.
need be, we'll try harder to make sure to continue to do so and to do so better. We also, but I mean, personally, each of us individually, Ryan and I talked off air. We were talking about this. We both are trying to make sure that in our personal lives that we are trying to be allies and fight racism where we can and speak up about it. This podcast just isn't that, though.
Yeah.
But
it felt weird to be talking a lot, but not talking about what was going on in the world, in our city for those couple of weeks, and even it's still happening.
Yeah,
but I think
yeah.
it's not the new normal per se, but it's still happening, which is actually a great thing.
Yeah.
But we feel like maybe we have some guests lined up and we really wanted to talk to them, and just know that, I don't know, it does feel weird not to go at it head on, but we're not a political show. Joel and I both have a point of view for sure. I think it's impossible to spend any time with us and not have that come out, but
right.
But that isn't what our show is about. We don't have any constructive solutions either. We can keep listening, and in any way we can help make the world a better place, we'll definitely do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a more insular guy. Joel says that we don't do this in our personal life, but Joel really is you're an advocate, and you speak the language in a way that I don't really. I clam up a little bit, but I don't go away or disengage. I try and stay engaged in stuff. I know you do more than that. I know you do that specifically with people, and even more specifically with children with disabilities, which is a really worthy cause. But you do it in general, and I think that's great. I don't know if I have it in me to do that as much, but y'all need to do more. That's clear.
Yeah. I mean, we all need to be doing more. I do think that and there's a part. I mean, I feel really uncomfortable. I don't know if it's a Minnesotan thing, a Midwestern thing.
It's part of it, I'm sure, because I
don't feel comfortable like advertising when I'm trying to be an ally or trying to, I mean, I'll, if I'm going to go march, I'm going to march. If I'm going to, volunteer someplace or do something, I'm going to just do it. I'm not going to be putting it out there on social media and etc. Or I'm not going to be talking about it. I'm not going to be devoting more time than on this podcast to talking about that stuff, because that's just this is a chance for us to, this is this is a way we unwind. This is a way we derive joy from life, is talking about entertainment that we love. And
we've said it before, big part of our mission is to be positive about stuff, to advocate for things. I mean, whether it's just movies or performers or whatever, I've had a few rants, and we're critics, so we're critical sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But by design, we try and put things forward that we're excited about, because that's the kind of tone we want to have. That's the kind of energy we want to bring to this endeavor. And it does, when the world becomes a darker, more difficult place, or when we're confronted so directly with how difficult and dark a place it can be, it feels like our place in it will keep.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Well, yeah,
and we hope that it will. We hope y'all came back now that we have another show on. And
and obviously in the situation that our country, and specifically the Twin Cities, found itself in over the last few weeks, we thought, we did talk about what we wanted to do. Did we want to do a show dedicated to talking about this? We for the two of us, and obviously Ryan, please correct me if I speak if I'm speaking wrongly.
I'm good at correcting.
But we felt it just better that we just shut up, we listen, we do things in our personal life, we do things and we weren't going to try to force enthusiasm to do a show at a time when we were not going to be able to,
when we weren't really feeling it.
Yeah, we weren't feeling like, okay, I don't really feel like talking about fun movies right now. Let's just take some time here.
And to talk about, lesson movies or morality tales, or, that didn't feel right either. It's not coming from us. That said, we both made a commitment to, whenever we can, just to continue to do our best, to keep our ears open. And when we learn something that applies to the world of the arts, where we feel like we have some valid things to say, we will try and integrate it in there. We're not just going to shut up, but we just don't feel comfortable being your go-to guys for
if we're your go-to
for 100% social commentary, which really was what was called for. And there were plenty of powerful voices out there doing that work. So we shut up and paid attention to them for a little bit. We appreciate you bearing with us. And
we appreciate you coming back. Hopefully you were watching or listening to this. And we really do appreciate you coming back. And we hope
we have a guest.
And we do have a guest, yes. And we hope that we can be a wonderful, a respite in your day. So let's bring in our guest, though.
For sure.
He is a guy who is very near and dear to our hearts. And we've all been friends for many, many, many moons. It is our dear friend, Michael Klug. Yay! Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us.
He's the Michael we reference on the show.
We do. We have said Michael many, many times on this show.
I am super excited to be here. You guys have no idea. Ever since you started this, I'm like, I want to be in on that in some way. And so here I am.
Yeah, this is as we were saying before. It's actually thanks to the pandemic. We're moving. In order to record together, we moved to this medium, and we're like, well, why should we just limit it to the two of us? This is a perfect opportunity to bring in guests, which is something we always had hoped to do.
Yeah,
we'll continue to do so. Michael is, let's see, we have all known each other for
28 years.
Yeah, to see, yeah, 96.
90, well, 92.
Oh, 92. Yeah, I guess 92 is when we met. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we have, we all went
27 years and change.
Yeah, we all went to college together, had performed together, have spent many, many, many late nights watching movies. The two of you, Ryan and Michael, were neighbors for like 2 years.
Yeah,
2 years.
To friends of mine who don't know Michael, whenever I catch myself talking about him or have some anecdote or whatever, repeating something he said, I always refer to him as my college roommate. And we weren't roommates. We were both super particular folks.
Yeah.
We had to have our own space. So we
yes.
were next door neighbors
Yeah.
who lived in single dorm rooms, basically.
Yeah.
Well,
But I still feel like we had some roommate experiences.
Oh, for
especially
sure, but
on the special nights.
No, because like I mean, it was a constant sharing of films. You know, we'd get homework done, go to dinner, whatever, and then it's okay. Where are we going to go? Generally, it's your place because you had the awesome surround. So that's where we would always go.
Yeah, we all had tiny little TVs, but I had pretty good sound.
Yeah, you did.
Did you? Because Ryan, you never had a roommate in the time that I was there. And Michael, I remember you
My freshman year, I had one.
My freshman year, I had two. I had one, and then I had a different one, and then I got the other one back. Thank the Lord Almighty.
No, I had my freshman year, and then I had one for my sophomore year for like a week, and then he scooted. I think he maybe thought I was coming on to him. I don't know, but he was gone quickly, and then immediately I went to the housing office, and I said, I'm doing a double as a single dorm. And from the rest of the time, that was it. And I never looked back. That was never a regret at all.
Oh, you never even moved, same as me.
Oh, I was in SNAR for 2 years opposite you, next door to you. And then I was in Nelson and Newmeyer, which Newmeyer no longer exists. So
yeah, that was the big can.
Yeah.
Afterwards? No, before. You were in Nelson and Newmeyer before you moved.
Newmeyer,
you graduated.
SNAR.
The last 2 years, you guys were next door neighbors.
Yeah.
Slash open door policy roommates.
Yeah. I don't want to go on this long harangue, but of course I think about that guy that lived on our floor that kind of came in probably that senior year, and we're only roommates on those special nights. If you recall that anecdote, Mr. Harris.
Yeah, I just made reference to it, but you missed it.
Oh, you just referenced it? Okay.
Yep, I did.
Yeah, because that was the funniest moment.
Are you roommates? Because the dude asked us that.
Yeah.
And I was like, we're only roommates on the special nights. And he didn't
know how to react. But that was also the guy, God bless him. He was a super nice guy. But, you and I had some pretty vast movie knowledge back in the day. All three of us did. And I remember he called him Stanley Kubrick.
Stanley Kubrick. That was, who was his favorite?
Yep, his
favorite
filmmaker.
Now, this is how he said it. I think I'm particular to the films of Stanley Kubrick. And I'm like, okay,
spectacular.
I'm not one of those people where if you say something wrong, well, not like that. If you mispronounce a name or you do something grammatically wrong, I will not correct you. I'll let you keep doing it for a lifetime, in fact.
Yeah.
But Kubrick was his favorite director, and the only movie he'd seen of his that he could name was, the most annoying one that you could be a fan of. What is it called? It's with Malcolm McDowell and.
Oh, Clockwork.
Oh, Clockwork Orange.
That's it.
You mind if I eat something while we were talking?
No, that's groovy. He hadn't seen anything. He hadn't seen. He hadn't seen anything. He just really, really liked A Clockwork Orange, which is again, he was a nice guy. He always brought me hamburgers and stuff. They would go on a hamburger run, and then he would bring me by like hamburgers and fries.
No, he was a really nice guy, so we shouldn't, I guess, but
we shouldn't tease him.
Fans, it was kind of a.
But dude, you're not a big Kubrick fan if you call him Kubrick and you've only seen Clockwork Orange.
And that's okay. You don't even have to be a big movie fan. It's not a requirement. So
You have to be able to tolerate a lot of movie discussion, whether you're into it or not.
yeah.
Right.
Most of the time, that's something of a movie fan. But
Mm-hmm.
some people are just like listening to other people talk about things they give a crap about. So that works too. But you got to be one of those two kinds of people.
Right. We hope that that's a lot of our audience, because
spending time with us would get mighty old.
I miss spending time with you guys because we played movie games constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all we talked about was movies. That was it. That was, considering we're theater kids, that was always important while we were doing it. Otherwise, it was movies and talking movie trivia and,
Yeah, it was our default setting. Was talking about movies. Was talking about what was coming out. Especially, and a lot of movies that, like, oh, you haven't seen that? Oh my God, we got it. And then we'll.
Yeah.
So.
Joel, you kept track of all the rags and knew what the latest projects were and what was in development and stuff. And,
my Premiere Magazine subscription, that was gold when that would arrive in my tiny little mailbox.
Yeah, so that was neat because I got that magazine too, but just for the pictures, I guess. 'Cause I didn't know. I didn't know what Rob Roy was until I was sitting in the theater a half an hour into it.
I haven't seen that.
But he knew it months out, which these days right? Oh, who's going to be the next Batman? Who's going to be this or that? Back then, you maybe would hear something like that, but not all this minutia where people followed the business of Hollywood.
Right.
No.
And for a while, when it was innocent, when it was in print, it was fun to do.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of ruined the whole thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that was at a time, I do think that the late 80s, early 90s was when the business of Hollywood and what sort of, what the opening box office was for a movie, that suddenly became relevant. That suddenly became a topic of conversation. Not the way that I think it ever was. I mean, box office was, obviously it's important to the business of it, but for the common person, it was never.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that movie made, have you seen that movie? Oh, well, you got to see a movie. The movie made like $100 million in a week. It's like the fact that it made money somehow became a qualifier for the film.
Well,
right, and worse.
'89. It was the summer '89 where Batman was released. That's where it started to really take hold.
Yeah.
Like that
Truly. And all the summers afterwards.
Yeah.
But where we've gone awry is, and this started then too, was predicting what was going to do well and what wasn't, and those things either becoming self-fulfilling prophecies, or it just, we talk about it on the show all the time, movies as a competition. Yeah, they are to some degree, but for that to be the focus of them is tragic, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Michael,
because you start to root for whatever your franchise that you love is, like a sports team, and it's just this. I guess it's fun when it's your sports team, but when it's movies, it feels weird. It feels like you can't. I don't know. You can't will them to be whatever.
But that's how I get around award season and Oscar season, which, we always kind of kept track of. I mean, I do get that competitive edge, especially if something really grabs me, then I'm like, I'm going to root for it all the way, even though, I wouldn't mind if blah, blah, blah won, but I want this to win,
Yeah. We feel that way too. But that's a little different.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like of wishing your movie does well when it opens in theaters at the expense of other films I mean, that is something that is
right. Your joy when something, for you to say, oh, you can't cast a black person as Johnny Storm, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and then when whatever that thing is disappoints, to do your victory dance on its ashes, it's just it just feels wrong to me. Like you don't have to, You don't have to be so into it as that. You should be into it when it's on and playing. You should be like, oh, they're doing something different. I'll give that a try. Like that whole attitude just seems to be gone. Not gone completely, but, and then maybe not even gone by the masses, but definitely, it is definitely waning heavily in our discourse about movies, which bums me out more than anything.
And speaking of discourse about movies, Michael, you for years living in Los Angeles. I don't know if we've mentioned that's where Michael is joining us from.
Well, you've got the theater that they have the Oscars in every year right outside your window.
Yeah, it's out our window. You get the backstage view.
So you are just in LA. You're not just in California or on the coast. You are in Hollywood. You're in the heart of it, where you
right
are.
there. Yeah.
And for years, you were a critic of films, especially.
Once a critic, always a critic.
But specifically horror films. Was it like Horror Freak News? Was
Horror Freak News? Yeah,
was the big one, and there were a handful of others that carried.
Well, I'm still working for Tom Holland's Terror Time every once in a while. I actually just published my first book review, which was kind of a big deal for me.
Oh, cool! Very cool.
And so it was fun during all that time. I worked for them for about 4.5, almost 5 years. Horror Freak I did, and then Tom Holland's Terror Time about 3 years, just off and on, maybe one article every 6 months. I'm not going crazy on it, but I think after those 4 solid years at Horror Freak, I was just burned out. I'm like, I can't, because I wrote approximately 400 articles in 4 years, and I'm like, can't do it.
Well, and it's not just the writing. If you love movies, you feel honored to be working in the industry, even as a critic. It's neat, but the movies become a job and a chore. And horror movies, you saw some amazing things that even as a horror fan you wouldn't have seen otherwise. So that's exciting. Sure. But you saw piles and piles of stuff that you were compelled to watch for your job that you didn't like, and that you had to try and find some. I mean, you're a good critic. You go either way, but you always looking for the silver lining in something.
No, because I understand how hard it is to do it and how hard it is to get it done, and so it should be celebrated that you did it. But if it didn't work, it just didn't work. I can't sugarcoat it. And you're right, Ryan. Every time I'd write a bad review, I'd try and find something worthwhile, even if it was small, because I just didn't want to pummel it. But there were a couple, and perhaps it was the frame of mind, that I tore to shreds. And the only one I really have regret about is I called something garbage. And that's really not appropriate, but that's how it ended up. It's out there, and that is what it is. But I always tried to find something good, because I know what a chore it is and how hard it is to do. So,
not to put, I'm putting you on the spot, and you don't have to answer right now, and we can come back to it later. But of the reviews, like, do you have like a go-to movie? Like if someone says, oh, what's a horror movie I should check out that I've probably never heard of?
It was actually my first month of reviewing when I got assigned to cover Screamfest 6 years ago, and we saw a film called The House at the End of Time, and it's a Venezuelan film. And
I have that film on your recommendation in my collection.
Man, it is. The thing is, and I'll just do this quick tangent, is like
House at the End of Time. Let's not bury the lead. People looking for a recommendation.
House at the End of the Time. It's a supernatural thriller, kind of akin to The Others in tone. But I remember seeing it at the Screamfest showing, and I laughed my ass off. I was absolutely terrified. And for the last half hour, when revelations started to come and they were so well done, I cried for 20 straight minutes. Like, I just couldn't stop crying. I was so invested. And I haven't watched it since. And the reason why, and this is, I think there's been one out of my perfect 5-star reviews over those 4 years. I think I gave maybe 15 perfect scores. There's one film that I've returned to because I don't want to go back. I don't want to ruin what was such a perfect experience to, nitpick and look at things like a little differently. So that's even House at the End of Time. I have not seen since.
I've seen it twice, and House at the End of Time, not to, put down what you're saying. I get exactly what you're saying. You've got this beautiful thing in a snow globe and you just want to preserve it forever. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But I could just tell you, it's a movie that does both of the things you're talking about. The first thing, sadly, it's not as good the second time you see it because because as good as it is, it was made with some limitations.
Sure.
The video that they shot it on is a little bit weird and antithetical to the kind of movie it is. So there's things, that on second passing when it wasn't all new to me and I was just trying to figure it out, I didn't like as much. But it's so well thought out of a story, and it really is a puzzle that you don't have to figure out. It all comes together for you. And when you sit through it the second time, when you get the inkling to do it and you're like, should I or shouldn't I recommend at least a second viewing of that. It's one of those movies whose very plot rewards a second viewing in a totally different way than the first viewing was.
Well, it's interesting because I met that screening, I met Alejandro, who's now a personal friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we've talked about it since then, and he talked probably in the initial interview, but of course we've socialized in other gatherings. And he said that when he wrote the script, he wrote, I think he said 15, 16 drafts, because every time he came up with a revelation, he would have to go back
and rework
it in again, on that first screening, this thing was seamless and you got all the answers you needed and they were shocking and
emotional. It's such an emotional movie.
Yeah.
It really is.
20 minutes, nonstop crying. 20 minutes at the end.
Yeah, I didn't cry, but it's the first word that came out of my mouth when I told you, hey, I watched this.
Yeah.
What an emotional movie. I mean, for real.
Yeah.
And I love that. Joel will tell you, when we pick our Oscars a year after the Oscars, like they redraft NFL teams, a year later or whatever, we do that to the Oscars. Because by then we've seen them all, because our lives aren't such that we go to all of them right before the Oscars like you do.
Yeah.
Some of them, but not all of them, not to have an opinion at Oscar time. Maybe someday the podcast will make enough bling that we can just spend all our time doing that kind of stuff. But right now we can't.
Note to future sponsors.
But I always pick the thing that makes me the most emotional.
Absolutely.
And even a year later, and that changes with time too. As a critic, those movies, the emotion does wear off a little bit. You can't help but not.
It's always been interesting to me when I was doing it full time that, and I've realized this as I've become a more knowledgeable moviegoer, because now I know a lot of things, how things are done, and the fact that if I can become emotionally invested in something, knowing full well that I might know the people, that I know how it might have been done, that tells me that you did something right. Like, if you can get me, and I don't necessarily think I'm jaded, which probably there could be a case made for that, but it's the fact that I just know a lot. And
even in a good movie, if you've done movies, you can feel where the camera is. You get a sense that there's nothing behind your point of view, but like catering and stuff like that. You can sense that even in a good movie, but when you really get wrapped up in a story, that all goes away. You can't think about it because you're too engaged.
Well, that's kind of the case for me. Like, as far as like Rise of Skywalker, for instance, people, yes, I could probably go back on only a second viewing and, start tearing shit apart. Pardon my French.
Oh yeah, you could.
Tearing things apart. But the fact that I was so emotionally engaged, I don't care that there was a continuity error or, Daisy Ridley had longer hair, whatever it is. I don't know. But it's like, I don't care. And that's what slays me about film goers that are automatically in tune to pull things apart, even on a first screening. Me, like you, Ryan, I just want to be transported. So any little things that might pop up, like, oh, it's going to go away pretty quickly if the story is deep enough for me to it doesn't matter,
Right. That's a generational thing, but it's also that discourse we were talking about. Some people's only game is to snark. It's the very classic 1-star worst period movie period ever period, or 10-star best period movie period ever period, exclamation point. And that's it. That's the only points of view we have on a lot of stuff critical these days. Is there's, whatever 8 other stars there that we don't choose to engage with.
Well,
it's not us when I say we, but just in general,
Yeah.
critics, it's not the same as it used to be. There's not.
Well, I didn't realize this, but the 4 years that I was, reviewing pretty consistently, apparently I got a reputation as a harsh critic. And I'm like, you can go back and look at my archives, because all the reviews, and yes, the majority of reviews are in either the half-star review, because I couldn't go lower than that. Our system wouldn't allow for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the second highest one is the 4.5 star, as far as how many. So it goes exactly with what you're saying, Ryan. It's like, there was a lot in between, but these two. So I'm always, people are like, you hate everything. I'm like, no.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If your movie sucked, there's nothing I can do about it.
Well, and when you're horror movies, it seems to me, what scares one person isn't always going to scare another person. And so if you're not cognizant of that as you're making the film, it's your film can lose credibility real fast.
Yeah.
Especially in that genre. Seems to me.
Yeah, I think horror is one of the most subjective genres. It's like,
right,
it either works or it doesn't, and you'll hear people say, this is the best movie ever made, and others just absolutely hate it. And like, going back to what Ryan said, there's no in between.
It's an incredible testing ground for young filmmakers for that reason.
Yeah.
Because in a way it's a little harsh, because you can make something that's finely crafted and still feels stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And no more than in horror than any place else. But if you can make it work, something fantastical on a little bit of money, and you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you can do it there, theory is you should be able to do it anywhere, because that's the hard part, really.
Right. Yeah, and it's one of those things is when you come up with your hook, with your moment, your shocking, and I mean shocking a revelatory moment.
Yeah.
When you're in that early process, that revelatory moment only works if you've done all of the work to lead up to it correctly. That's something I think that we'll talk about a lot more when we each break down our scenes that we're going to be talking about later. But yeah, I mean, it's all the work that's done leading up to a moment that I think sometimes gets rushed because a filmmaker's like, oh no, I got this cool thing, you're gonna love it.
Well, that's the thing. I wrote in a bajillion reviews. It's like, you didn't earn this. That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But you didn't do it right. And then you have other people that overfeed information, like they cut away to a shot of an object. It's like, well, clearly that's going to be important. You got to be subtle, and people just, it's amazing watching all those movies.
It's a hard line to walk.
It is. And
I watched your movie 2 nights ago. I watched Space, which is your feature that you were in, and I had the same reaction to it, frankly, as the former thing that you said, which was, I don't know if I never thought, oh, you didn't earn this. I was baffled by it, I guess. It was diverting enough, but I didn't, for whatever it was going for, it didn't connect with me. So I felt like in that movie, I felt like I somehow failed by the time it was over. I was like, oh, there's evidence of stuff here I should have been following or catching the hints of, and I just wasn't.
Well,
part of it, technical rant.
Yes.
Part of it is it was clearly shot and mixed in stereo, and Xfinity, maybe everybody for streaming, baked the stereo feed into 5.1 so they could sell it as a 5.1 surround thing, which had all the, because if you just play stereo through a decent stereo system, it'll turn it into 5.1 for you. If you bake 2 channels into 5.1 and send 5.1 out when 3.1 of them are doing nothing. It sounds weird. It sounds like a weird 50s movie where if somebody was to the left, all their sound of their voice was coming from the left. Like, people don't make stuff that way anymore, you know?
Right.
And I don't think he made it that way, frankly.
No.
So, because you wouldn't. It'd be way more work than it was worth. So that's just a technical thing that frustrated me. It's not Space's fault. It's clearly
I appreciate you
fault.
taking a look, and for the plug, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I saw an early cut, and then I saw, final cut. I'm like, I think it's impressive with
the graphics were neat. The changing aspect ratios were used really, really well.
Yep.
The location shooting was really nicely done.
Mm-hmm. And my
the
performance,
broken timeline even worked pretty good for me when you learned things about people, right?
Right.
So there's some nice things
And
because
you were in it.
And you were on that stage.
You looked like you were having a great time.
Exactly.
How did you memorize?
How did you memorize all
lines?
those lines?
Oh, well, thank you.
I thought the
That was
performances,
really nice.
for the most part, were across the board were pretty good for that kind of movie.
All right. So let's just get her back around.
I just thought, there we
film.
go. Well, before we start talking about other people's movies, we plug your movie
that's great.
Space 2020. That's how you'll find it. There's a lot of things with space in the name.
Yeah.
It's an interesting film. It's an ambitious film, which I appreciated when it was over. Normally I'd go online and somebody would explain it all to me. That hasn't happened yet. That review or that deep dive hasn't happened.
Space Wiki has not been created yet.
But when
I'll get on
it. Now you have Michael. You've loved horror films like your whole life, right?
Yeah.
Like from an early age in the hinterlands of South Dakota.
You bet. My first, I think my first true exposure, I was 8, and HBO was playing Creepshow ad nauseum, and
there
you go. There it all started. And I think it's interesting that my first big exposure was a Romero film. That I think speaks volumes.
And an anthology film too.
Yeah, but that movie scared me to death, even though it's a comedy in some aspects. But that movie really, really messed me up. So.
Mm-hmm. And so horror. Yeah, and I was I don't think I was quite that young, but I remember. Yeah, I mean, vividly going through my high school years what horror movie were we gonna, me and my friends were we gonna watch this? Yeah, what were we gonna watch? Well, because usually we could see bare breasts.
Yep.
But then also, it was cool to watch these creepy, scary movies. I mean, I remember watching that, watching from an early age. But obviously you've stuck with it. It is maintained. It has continued to become continued to be a big part of your it shapes what you in the movies that you write and
right
and some of the things.
I mean, it's interesting how being a kid in small town South Dakota, and I have now socialized with some of the horror actors that I watched at age 10. And it's a little surreal. I think I'm over that initial, this is the coolest thing ever to happen in my life. Now it's just like, no, that's cool. I met so-and-so, and
you are not over it.
No, but like,
you started at 100 and maybe now you're at 78.
Perhaps.
Still compared to the rest of us, you are a
but I mean, socializing with these people at parties, it's bizarre to me, and not in a work capacity when I was interviewing them, but we're hanging out, and do you guys remember the film Witchboard with Tawny Kitaen? You guys remember that film?
Sure.
I'm hanging out with the director at basically every horror party that I go to. I've sat and just chatted with him, and I'm like, this is unreal. I watched this movie 15,000 times as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am talking to him, getting inside scoop. Like, he told me that there was a sound issue in the opening credits, and so his brother, who wrote the music, put a flourish in right over this weird sound they couldn't seem to get out of the mix or something. I'm like, oh, well, I have that
Composer
instinct.
brother. That's good. That's a good thing to have.
Yeah. So
But why do you think horror movies have stayed with you for as long as they have?
I think it was the fact that they, so deeply disturbed me that I think there was something, and I wouldn't say perverse, but something odd about.
There's something primal that they get, that they reach inside you that only actual horror can get to the same spot. So
yeah, and I mean, obviously, it was
unique in that way.
It was a high, and
oh sure, yeah,
and so I think that and obviously that influenced my writing, my career trajectory. Everything about horror has influenced, where I am now. And it's funny. It doesn't matter what kind of idea comes up for a script, even if it might be semi-innocent. Within 2 hours of brainstorming or thinking about it, something will start creeping in. It's like, how is this going to turn dark? And
yeah.
Generally it will. Even if it's a comedy, there's some kind of weird elements that'll start working. I can't not have it there. It's weird. Yeah.
I hated horror movies growing up.
Yeah.
Just as a contrast, I like them much, much better now, although I don't like many of them. But the ones I like, I tend to like a lot.
Yeah.
And because if you want a new, different experience, if you want to experience something you don't want to experience in your real life, you go to the movies, and horror just represents that, I think, better than any other genre. The more put through the ringer you are emotionally, or just more disturbed you are, the more effective they are, the more cool that safe but still sort of emotionally harrowing experience is.
It's
and the key to me, just to finish my thought, it was to watch them by myself. As a communal thing, as a kid, I thought they were just mean. Everybody was giggling and laughing and ripping on the people in it, and I had no fun doing that at all. When I started watching them in the dark by myself, then it changed the way I look at them.
Free of external judgment and
well, and the tone of them changed too. We go through in and out of different eras where they're very serious things or they're very stupid comical things, and I tend to like
it's interesting.
More serious eras.
My outlook on horror has begun to shift, and it's kind of jarring, I guess, because that's always been, it's me. That's what I am, is all horror, and I'm starting to have problems with certain horror. Like I'm not enjoying certain things that are meant to upset me, and they do, but it's not a joy anymore. And I'm starting to kind of come to terms with that. And I mean, a perfect example is Hereditary. Yeah. And I ultimately think it dropped the ball big time for like maybe toward up to the climax. I'm like, you've lost me. Otherwise, it would have been a perfect experience for me. But, and I think a lot of it's, Colette's credit, because there are a couple of scenes in there, I'm like, I couldn't process what I was being engaged in. It was just too upsetting. So it wasn't fun. I appreciated that, her performance should have been Oscar nominated. And I appreciate what everyone else did and what the filmmaker, what Oster did, but I didn't like that. I didn't like it at all. And
yeah, you didn't like the way it made you feel.
No.
I get it. I didn't like the way it made me feel either, but I really liked it because it painted me into just this awful, horrible corner. I admired the skill in that. But I agree. To say I enjoyed myself when I was watching it would not be correct.
Yeah.
And when we reviewed it on the show, we said flat out, this is not Insidious 2. This is not like that. You're really going to be faced with some just terribly unpleasant and awful things.
Right.
And,
well, I don't know
if
it's age or this
maturity, emotional maturity makes it harder.
Maybe. But yeah, it's like I don't like that. I don't, and again, like just like I'll agree with you. It's like, yeah, it made me upset, and you obviously did something right, Mr. Director Writer.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
it wasn't a good time.
But yeah,
and
it
just
wasn't.
to go,
It's not a fun film.
Yeah, it's not a you disturbed me, you upset me in that way of like, oh
you
man,
made me jump
I
now
can't
past
believe
the
you got to
popcorn.
me.
It is not that kind of film.
Well, yeah, but
at all.
or even like if you're like, boy, that was oh my god, that's sticking with me. That was and it's that feeling of you got me. It's that feeling, it is that feeling of, oh man, this was ew. Yeah, no.
we're going to be silent walking out of the theater because I don't really know what I want to talk about.
I can't imagine. Again, I'll say it again. I can't imagine watching that in a theater.
Yeah,
I got to experience that by myself on TV, alone, here at night. Whatever my reactions were, my own. I didn't have to talk about it afterwards. I think that movie benefited from watching it that way.
I don't know, but I don't doubt it. I would like to look at it again because my initial experience, because I did review it, and I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 because
Pretty good.
you failed. Because
It's not bad. 3.5 is good.
It's not at all because of so much, like we were talking about, so much power, but you just missed the ending. You failed so terribly. And one of the things that I've become aware of in my own movie watching is that most of the time it's not me to blame because I'm not distracted. I don't allow myself to be distracted when I'm watching movies, but Hereditary is a perfect example. You had me 100%. I was terrified. I was upset. And then there was one moment in the film where I literally click, I'm done. You've lost me. That's it. And
there are those kinds of experiences. I mean, we talked about how hard horror is. You can really wrap people up. Hey, I've said this before on the show too. I'll say it again. The endings of a full third of all horror movies are absolutely awful. They're either anticlimactic or there's some leap of logic you can't take, or when the beasts come out of the shadows, they're not scary at all. They're just stupid. I have 3.5 stars. When they go bad, I work really hard not to erase the entire experience of the film because I think it's really tough to stick the landing in some sort of weird supernatural freak show.
Something like Hereditary, though. I don't understand how, but not, I didn't quite like it, but, I made it through to the end. I literally shut down. And it's a weird, I could feel a click in my brain. Done. I sat back. That's it. And they never got me back. And in my mind,
they shouldn't be able to after that.
No, but it's like I'm not thinking about bills or where we're going to have lunch after the movie. That's not running. If you lost me in the middle of something you had me, that's your fault. And because people are like, oh, you were being mean. I'm like, no, I didn't do anything.
I don't think 3.5 stars is mean anyway.
No.
Well, I mean, because people were like, "Oh my God, this movie is defining."
I've given 2 perfect ratings out in the last 5 years. He's given 5. That's a job of a critic.
Yeah.
Films aren't perfect. Even the ones you give the perfect ratings to aren't perfect.
Sure.
It's not everybody's not in the fan club, and that's not the same as what we were talking about before. Michael wasn't rooting against the movie. He didn't pat himself on the back for it not working when he walked out. He was disappointed by it.
Sure, yeah.
And still gave it a positive review. I don't know why you were catching. I mean, I know why you were catching grief. I thought it was really good, so I get what they're saying. But attacking the critic who the thing didn't click for, I mean, it's one person's opinion. What are you going to do?
If and when you do give it another watch, whether it's you and your husband or just by yourself or whatever, make sure you shoot us a line. So I want an update about when you, and obviously if you ever sit down and watch The House at the End of Time.
Yeah.
If you ever sit down, what happens? What happens to those viewings?
It's funny. I'm afraid to go back to Hereditary because I hated Midsummer from start to finish. So you've used up any goodwill I've had.
Apparently, there's a director's cut that's 40 minutes longer.
Why? I was literally angry when I walked out of that film. I hated it. I didn't have to review it, but Mr.
Yeah, but
Aster, I'm sorry, as great as Hereditary
people
was,
still look to you. You know, you have a following, and they're all like, "What do you think about it?" And you're going to tell them.
God, it's terrible movie.
I haven't seen that yet, but I whatever's wrong with it can't be fixed by 40 extra minutes. And normally I'm like, hey, bring on the extra minutes. Like I hate cutting anything.
Yeah.
But,
So let's segue to things that we actually really do like, that we like a lot.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
When we were talking about this show, we were talking about because again, like we are doing, we could literally just go on for hours talking about staying in the genre of horror. We could just go on and on and on. But we wanted to talk specifically. We decided to focus specifically on some sequences that are that we consider, well, the word that we kept coming up with, masterful sequences, specifically in this horror thriller genre, and because a good horror film, you know, we've seen some of these we were talking a little bit before we started recording about some of the moments that are kind of iconic that have become touchstones for other films. The shower scene in Psycho. Halloween. We were talking about in Halloween that thing where the camera moves away. You know, the camera's on on a protagonist, and then the camera moves away, and then when the camera comes back, there's a dude right here.
Yep.
And and we've seen that in movies that's gone beyond the genre. We get that in other things too. Obviously, feel free to jump in if there's any that I'm skipping. I don't want to talk about.
I mean, basically anything.
The opening sequence in Jaws.
Right.
Yeah.
Jaws isn't even it's a monster movie, I suppose, but it's really an old-fashioned hunt the animal adventure survival movie.
Yeah.
But it's considered a horror movie, and probably rightfully so, because it has the opening scene in Jaws is one of the best horror sequences of all time.
Yeah.
In a Hitchcock sort of way, but still, it is horrific. And everything in the film is built off of that moment. So that's, you know.
And the fact that it's 30, 45, 40 years, 45 years? Yeah. You know,
and they haven't rebooted it yet. Thank God.
Oh God, don't do it. I mean, that's
so coming up here in a few weeks. We're going to do our top four Jaws movies countdown.
like,
so tune in for that.
Yep.
There's only 4, or are you going to do the ripoffs?
Joel says we should do top 5. We need to talk about it. It'll either be top 4 Jaws movies or top 5 Jaws movies. It can't be. We can't include ripoffs because top 5 Jaws ripoff movies is going to be a show at some point.
Got it.
I just think,
as a matter of fact, that episode might be a top 10 list. We'll see.
Well, yeah, because there certainly can be.
But if we can think of a 5th Jaws movie that's not a Jaws movie and not a Jaws ripoff, somehow it'll be a top 5 list for sure.
Oh, okay. I was going to say,
or we could just call it a top 5 list and never ever acknowledge that we never had a 5th movie.
And they'll have to go back and watch this episode to know what was even going on.
Correct. All right, so let's start talking about some sequences that we think are just really, really tremendous filmmaking.
Each picked one.
Yeah, we each picked one, and of course we will start with our fantastic, amazing,
our esteemed guest, our expert.
Well, I chose because, of course, there's a lot of things that, you know, and I would have assumed I'd grab something from Day of the Dead, which is my all-time favorite, and then I actually ended up choosing something from Dawn of the Dead, the remake.
Right,
so,
which was a surprise.
Yeah, I saw that in the theater, I think 5 times. I saw it opening night, and at that point in my life, just as a little precursor, I was so terrified, and I'm talking about the opening 10 minutes of the film where you meet Sarah, or Anna, the Sarah Polley character, and all the way up to when the credits roll. She crashes the car, the credits roll. I went into the theater sitting down because I believe that Universal had released a couple of minutes of that opening sequence prior to the film's release. So seeing the trailer, I went into the theater with 100% on the verge of a panic attack. And that is not a joke. That is not, that's colorful.
Yeah.
We sat down and I'm like, I turned to my husband. I said, I don't know if I can do this, because I was already so on edge. And then those opening 10 minutes, which are absolutely relentless. And as you guys know, zombies are my thing. And zombie scenarios where there's a breakdown of society and chaos terrifies me. I still to this day have very intense, horrific zombie dreams. Like they come out of nowhere. And so sitting down for something that wasn't the shambling zombies, even though George doesn't like them, but they're setting it up so beautifully with Anna. You get a little bit of relationship with her husband. You get that they're in love. They just have a pretty basic, normal life. And then, of course, there's these little hints. You know, the guy went to the ICU with a bite. Oh, that's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, the news reports in the background.
The news reports. And when the girl finally, spoiler, obviously, when Vivian finally shows up in the morning and, she's half eaten and she's already...
Well, and we've met her, too, in this just adorable little...
yeah.
Very real and grounded interaction.
Yeah.
And credit to the little girl, of course, is great, but credit to Sarah Polley, who's spectacularly, has always really been spectacularly good.
Yeah.
And is really, really good in that film in grounding it in reality, which just makes it all the more scary.
And
he's not a big star or anything,
no.
but she carries the movie emotionally and without being melodramatic, which is really impressive.
Well, I think that's a testament.
Because I can promise you, Zack Snyder didn't help her much. What you see is what she brought to the party, basically.
Well, I think that's a testament, though, to the writing. It's James Gunn, his kind of first big deal, and you get 10 minutes. I mean, you get even less than that before the SHIT hits the fan, and so in those couple of minutes, you like her. You see that she's a regular person that you can identify with. She's a nice neighbor lady. They don't have kids. I mean, all of these little things are so beautifully done so that when things hit 5 minutes later, you're 100% invested in Anna. You're going to go because you like her and she's a good person. And of course, she's just had this horrific event with her husband being killed. But
there's that other fear too, that you went to bed on a Friday night and while you were asleep, the world ended outside your window and you just didn't know. That's a thing of nightmares in and of itself, even if you just leave the details out, and the details are really grisly.
Yeah. I mean, I watched it last night. I watched the entire film because, of course, I've seen it dozens and dozens of times, but I'm like, let me revisit. And it was interesting because that opening sequence still my chin started to quiver. Like, this is just too upsetting to me.
I watched that with a roommate of mine, and she made me stop after that sequence. And I'm like, are you sure? Because it's that kind of movie, but that's really as bad as it gets. That's as bad as any of these kinds of movies get.
Well, and it's interesting because
actually probably feel better if you watch more of it. She's
because when we went and saw it opening night, we watched that opening sequence, and again, legit panic attack in the works. And this is, again, not being melodramatic. Had they continued at that pace and not cut to the credits, I would have had to leave. I would have had to walk out.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding you. I couldn't. I mean, my heart was just beating. I was sweating. I mean, and to me, it's like something that effective. And even to this day, it still gets me a little worked up. There's something magical there.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of credit to Sarah Polley for, as Ryan so rightfully put it, she keeps it grounded when she's the first moment or it's the second moment of like this, if you want to break the scene down, the bathroom, when you get into the bathroom sequence and she's in there, she is absolutely, you see in her face the WTF of it all, but in a very real, because it's almost like that, like Ryan said, like that waking up. It's like she hasn't fully woken up yet.
Yeah.
What is this really happening?
Right. She gets out, she makes her escape, gets out to the car, and then can't pull the car out of the driveway. Just literally freezes and can't function.
Yep.
And it's totally earned by everything that you've seen that's gone before.
Yep.
Yeah.
And every single time she's driving, and when she's driving around the neighborhood, and every time she comes in contact with a person, you don't know if it is, if it is a eaten person or a person about to be eaten.
Right.
And
in a zombie movie, there's only that brief period of time where that's an issue. You know what I mean?
Right.
But so you got to make the most of that time, and that the Dawn of the Dead remake absolutely does. It absolutely does. And Zach, if you're watching, man, we think he's a fan of the show.
We're pretty confident that he tunes in.
Take a lesson from that, dude. Next time you frankly, before you make any other movies, before you make each of your next 10 movies, sit down and watch the opening of Dawn of the Dead again. When that stunt woman goes flying into that bathtub and the curtain falls on her, I mean, there's no slow motion there. We don't dwell on anything. We don't, you know what I mean? It's not picturesque in any sort of way. And I love all those things about Zach. He makes slow, beautiful, picturesque sort of comic book panel movies, which is great. It's appropriate a lot of the time. It wouldn't, like 300 wouldn't be the same without all the slow-mo and stuff.
Yeah. Right.
But sometimes just the raw, real impact of something, don't forget that that's powerful. You don't need to see people's bones coming out of their arms in slow motion and the blood flicking slowly across the Panavision screen. Just do something.
But that's the magic of that opening sequence. Like you said, it's raw. These
relentless.
Are people. This is a real situation.
It's unmerciful.
Not romanticized at all. It's just, here it is. Yeah. And these people are screwed,
Was this where we got the reinvention of the zombie? Refresh my memory.
That was 28 days later, technically. That started the fast-moving zombies.
But they're infected in 28 days later.
Yeah, they're not zombies. But it's same difference. They're not alive. They're dead, and they're eating.
Romero was a huge opponent to running zombies, and it's interesting that the book that I just did that first book review on is The Living Dead. It is his final creative project, and Daniel Krauss, who wrote like The Shape of Water, the novelization of that, he finished it. But it's funny, they actually bring up running zombies in the book. It's hysterically funny. It's such a wonderful it's great.
I like running zombies. I mean, I like all kinds of zombies. I understand his orthodoxy, what the zombie is and how it moves, and the danger of what it is anyway, and what it represents is lost a little bit when they go into berserker mode and are just faster and meaner and everything than you. The metaphor of it with George is always really focused on is lost a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I'm sorry, you cannot deny the power of that scene, or the first time you come across them in 28 days later too. It's how can you possibly survive that?
Yeah.
You can't even have a fantasy about surviving it. If there'd have been 2 more, you'd be dead right now. Whereas with zombies, we all like to think, well, we can walk faster and we can do this and we can do that. Mm-hmm. And so the writers have to think of these creative ways to trap you. Yeah. And if you can do that enough times, then you've made a good zombie movie.
Yeah.
That's lost. When they can just chase you, it's just a chase.
Yeah, you're screwed.
Yeah. But I'll take all kinds. I'll call them infected, not to offend the cult, but I just think zombies, it's all good.
Basically the zombies get in.
They do basically get in.
And then havoc ensues.
Because of what's his face from Modern Family. What a douche nozzle he is in that movie. It's funny because he's the exact same sort of lovable, clueless guy, except this guy's just a dick. So instead of having any
Yeah.
kindness in his heart, he has none. And when you take that away, you're talking about the most dangerous person on the planet.
Yep.
And he proves it.
Ty Burrell. Yeah.
He's fantastic in it.
Yeah.
He's really good. Don't get me wrong, but
Before he really became bumbling Phil Dunphy.
he was
goofy
bumbling yuppie. I don't remember the guy's name. He only has a first name. Steve?
Yes. God,
Is
you're
it-
right. I just watched it
it's
last
so-
night and had
If it's not Steve, it's something just like Steve.
it's something. It's basically Steve. If it's not
He's
Steve,
basically
it's basically Steve.
Yeah.
So let's change. Let's shift gears dramatically and move to Ryan's sequence.
To early 80s art horror.
Yeah, art horror. That's a perfect example.
It's what it is, or it's what it was meant to be.
Yeah.
You can decide where the art is in this movie. It's not a beloved movie. Its creator hates it. So
Oh, really?
that tells you something. But he hates it. He's preventing it from being released widely.
And
But we won't. Those are just
Yep.
rumors. We won't get into that. But
Yep.
he has to be, because there's lots of people interested in it being
Yeah.
released. In 1983, Michael Mann picked up the rights to F. Paul Wilson's novel, World War II horror novel, The Keep. And here's the word of warning before I go off, because I'm very enthusiastic about this sequence and I'm going to talk about it. And as I talk about the premise of this movie and this sequence in particular, and even how things play out in the movie, you're going to be desperate to see it. And I warn you, it's really bad. It's not a good movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also
But
real quick,
there are these moments of magic in it that make you wish that for something things could have been different.
And maybe you're about to touch on this, and I apologize. But you also look at it, and you'll look at the cast and who's in this film, and you'll go, "My God, how have I not seen this? Yeah, I gotta watch it." And then
Jürgen Prochnow, as still a relatively young man, hot off of Das Boot.
Mhm.
Gabriel Byrne in one of his first films. Alberta Watson, Ian McKellen. As an old man who becomes a young man, who becomes an old man. Again, spoiler alert for The Keep. So it's kind of funny. He's playing a guy who's about the age he is now in the film, even though he was a relatively young guy.
Yeah.
And Scott Glenn, can't forget him. And Robert Prosky. Why not?
Oh, yeah, Robert Prosky.
Everybody with a name in the film.
But yeah, you look at that and you're like, that's a damn fine cast.
That's why I rented it, because I knew all those names, and because of the little thing. It listed the characters like a good horror novel does, where it says they're, the professor who knew its secret, and the soldiers assigned to protect it, and the whatever, something to do they all meet together tonight. They will face the evil. And there's this great old-fashioned movie poster right out of the days when the names of movies used to be carved into old Roman buildings.
Yes.
That was like a thing. Ben-Hur, and there's a whole bunch of them. Genghis Khan. The Keep, it's this castle where that spells out the letters of this simple, creepy name. And I'm like, oh, I got to watch that. And I watched that and The Fury, Brian De Palma's post-Carrie other telekinetic movie the same night.
Extravaganza.
Yes. I started watching The Keep and I turned it off and put in Fury because I was like, The Keep is the second movie. Definitely. I knew that just from the intro. And if I was wrong, I'd have switched them back. I don't do that very often, but I put them in. I knew I put them in the wrong order before I'd even seen more than 10 minutes of one of them. The Keep starts out with this amazing, opening credits sequence. It's this very weird, dreamlike, extremely 1983 movie that takes place during World War II, and yet it has all these crazy horror and fantasy elements in it that don't fit anywhere really. So it's a movie out of time, truly. The design feels really modern, and yet it's all made out of stuff from ancient, otherworldly times. These German soldiers are assigned to watch this keep in the Carpathian mountains that guards this pass to the Turkish oil fields that they've just taken and that they need to help the war effort. So all they really got to do is just sit there and monitor and keep wire somebody if they see any bad guys coming through the pass. Engage them if they can, but get the word out. That's their only job. And the keep is already, the townsfolk are weird and creepy, and they're not happy that these interlopers are here, but they seem almost like too scared when they seem scared of something else, and yet nobody can really say what it is. So it's all very mysterious and awesome. The sequence starts where these couple of German guys are the first night on watch who've already shown themselves to be very greedy and stupid. We all know these kinds of characters. One who's just stupid and one who's super greedy, and it's a bad combo. They find that all these crosses that are built inside this weird castle are all made of nickel and fairly worthless. But one of them, when the moonlight hits, it glows this special way. And they take a knife out and cut it, and it's silver. And they think it marks the spot of hidden treasure and that this is their big chance to get rich. So they run out to get some tools. And I was just knocking slow motion, but they're running from that cross to get the other guy to run back into the cross. Must be 4 of these 10 minutes.
Yeah.
With Tangerine Dream gurgling away and everything's backlit and there's like smoke everywhere and I didn't see them, but it feels like there's like lasers in the smoke.
Yeah, and they're wearing like big old army ponchos so that
that are fluttering in the
flowing in the wind.
Gorgeous.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. It really is dreamlike and amazing, and it's silly and stupid too. It all depends on the context. But again, it was 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night. I was down in the basement alone. I was watching this thing, and the first 35 minutes of the keep, this 10 minutes in particular, just had me. They just had me completely. They get back to that cross and they start pulling it out, and the whole inner stone starts moving and it falls out, and they go crawling in there to look for more silver. And as this guy, Lutz, Sergeant Lutz or Private Lutz, sticks his head through this little opening in the interior wall of the keep, the camera pans back from his face. It's one of the most astonishing camera shots I've ever seen in the history of movies. Mm-hmm. It pans back and back and back, and it just keeps going and going and going. And the things that you see, you don't know what they mean. You don't know where you are. You can't see the guy that you were looking at anymore. And this weird sort of light show happens and things come together and you start flying at a rapid pace back at this guy. He screams outside. His partner is holding his legs. His body goes limp. He pulls him out. Half of him is gone. A force comes rushing through that hole that's so strong that it shatters every bone in the other guy's body in slow motion. He goes flying backwards like a rag doll.
Yeah, his shoe goes flying. And it's simultaneously hilarious and
horrific and just
horrific. Yeah, I mean it's
because it's clearly not a person. It's clearly some mannequin thing. But
the way it's shot and the shoe, just this boot, I should say, goes flying, and you're like, damn.
Yeah, that guy will be goose stepping no more. And then something weird happens. And some guy is sleeping in some other place, and this similar sort of backwards light show happens over him, and his eyes open like he's aware that this has happened. And he grabs a bag and walks towards the door of wherever he lives and walks out. And as he walks out, and I always love a great subtitle. The subtitle says, whatever town in Greece. This movie takes place in Turkey, in Transylvania, essentially. Mm-hmm. This dude in Greece just woke up when this happened, and he marches out, gets on a boat, and the boat rides slowly into the sunrise, heading east for some unknown purpose. again, the synthesizers of Tangerine Dream cannot be undersold. They make every moment in this work, except that pullback shot. All you hear is wind. That's silent, except this horrible wind. That where can it be coming from inside a building like that? You think you're about to watch the greatest, coolest, most bravest, artfully done film you've ever seen, and it doesn't quite fall apart all at once, but it falls apart steadily and surely every following scene after this.
It's interesting, Ryan, because
until by the end you're just like, what?
You're the one that introduced this to me, and that was one of our late night watches. Yeah. And what I remember so vividly is this sequence. And when you said you're going to do it, I'm like, oh my God, I've got so much to say, because I was sitting on your big couch. You were sitting on your bed. We're watching this, and it had to have been 11, midnight, whatever. It was very
the witching hour.
And I was very tired. And
that helped, I'm sure.
You're like, let's watch this. And I'm like, okay, sure. Not knowing that it was basically a big hypnotic piece with, soothing synthesizer. And I'm like, I didn't know what I was getting into. But I remember watching that sequence and I'm sure you probably prefaced it, like, oh, watch this or something. But I watched, and I remember the pullback, from
I'm not much for a preface when you're in my grasp. I probably didn't tell you. I probably deliberately told you less than nothing about it, would be my guess.
That happened, and I remember my memory of this, because I looked at the sequence again 2 nights ago. But I remember my first experience, and perhaps it was the fact that it was 11:30 at night. I thought that pullback lasted literally 4 minutes. I thought that's how long it took, because I remember watching it and my eyes kind of dipped a little bit. And so when I watched it the other night, I'm like, oh, I mean, it's still amazing to look at, but I'm like, this is like a minute.
Yeah, just a minute.
But it's the perception thing. It's like the beginning of Star Wars when the Star Destroyer goes over, and it's just, oh my God, this thing is just enormous. Yeah. And then you watch, then the second, third, fourth time you watch it, you're like, yeah, it's a big ship. But it's not nearly. It feels like it took forever to see the underside to get to the back of that.
You remember it being forever.
Yeah. And it's very similar to the Keep too. Yeah, the first time it feels like you're just going forever, and it's so black. I mean, it's
but it's not just black. There's enough
and
that
then
you can
start,
see.
There
are these shadows within weird, the otherworldly modern design elements that you can't make sense of. There are these weird rows of parallel monoliths, and I've watched it really, really carefully in all the best sources I could find, and there's all kinds of things in that shot that are really weird that it spends no time on, and it keeps you disoriented and confused. And the Keep was built to keep something in. Clearly,
and that's where you start to feel that is it's like,
I haven't seen the full film, and I don't even know how long, because I actually have a copy of it on VHS. Unfortunately, I don't have a VCR. So
there's a region-free Australian widescreen DVD of it.
Ooh. Okay.
That it's the only official in the disc era it's brand new that's ever been released of the Keep, and it's the best it's ever looked by far. Which is not to say that it looks amazing, but the Keep, just watching the Keep in widescreen makes a huge difference, because it's a shot in Panavision. So the focus is important. It's shot like a John Carpenter movie, basically. It's a very wide film, and its fairy tale atmosphere benefits from that.
Yeah, I mean,
but
it
falls apart. It becomes a weird series of bizarre chamber drama talkie scenes where they're talking about, and you feel like all the stuff that's happening out in the Keep somewhere or in some magical land, you're not privy to. You're just seeing the petty arguments about the players on the periphery of the story. And then the ending doesn't end. There's 20 minutes they just lopped off the end of the movie, because Wally Weavers, who was the special effects, a longtime special effects genius, but he was the supervisor on that film, and he died before post-production started. And nobody knew how the hell he was going to do anything. They hadn't shot anything with green screen. They shot this big epic battle with a velvet black background. And even his own crew would ask him, what are you going to put here? And he would just smile and wink at them and be like, oh, wait till you see it.
Oh.
And when he died, they cut it together, but they didn't know what to do. And because Michael Mann edits slowly, the first half hour of the movie is edited as good as anything ever made. It's so good. It's just what he promised. It's a horror tale, but it's really a strange, otherworldly fairy tale. And then it's like all they had that they could work with were the on-set scenes of conflict between people, interpersonal conflict, right. And they didn't do any of the other stuff. They didn't finish any of it. So it's not all their fault that the movie falls apart. It's not like they didn't know what they were doing. They just literally didn't know what they were doing and couldn't do it. They've edited it together. It's out there. That sequence is somewhere where you can watch it. Wow. The big battle, but you couldn't been in the movie. It couldn't have been in the movie because it just looks bizarre and weird.
But it's always interesting to me, like, why Mann disowns it. It's like the same thing, like Faye Dunaway disowns Mummy.
Yeah, because it was a failure. It was taken from him.
I know, but it's like after all of these years and you see that it's gotten this amazing following and people want it, why not just give in? It's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to help you get a restored version. Let's do
David Lynch was offered whatever he wanted to finish Dune however he wanted. And that material still survives in good shape. And those effects are done. And he wouldn't do it. It's just too painful to go back and work on something that he felt was compromised from the start. And Mann is ashamed of it, not because it's silly. And if you've seen any of his other movies, they're all super cool. Yeah. Miami Vice is cool. The Thief is cool. Heat is cool. Last of the Mohicans even is cool. This movie is the opposite of cool. It's bizarre and ultimately it's stupid. And I just think he don't want people to. Right now, it's hard to get. It's hard to hear about. It's hard to find somebody who likes it to talk about it, and he knows that, and so he puts the kibosh on it every time they put it out. Again, they offered him a chance to recut it if he wanted or do what he wanted. This was back when Collateral was a big hit.
Sure.
Same studio, Paramount. And they said, hey, do you want to do this? We're releasing a DVD, but we could hold off on it. And he goes, well, how about I don't do this and you hold off on releasing the DVD at the same time? And then never release it. And they never did. They never did.
Wow.
Because what Michael Mann's going to do next is way more important to every movie studio than what he did in 1983 that at least 70% of the people agree suck. It's too bad. But I swear by that Australian DVD. You can find it on eBay. It'll play in any player. Make sure you're getting the Australian one. There's tons of bootlegs out there.
Okay.
And but going back to that sequence.
Go on the Joel and Ryan movie show Facebook page and say, Ryan, is this the version of The Keep you're talking about? I will explain it to you.
Yes.
Okay.
I won't leave you dangling, whoever you are. And Michael, you can reach out privately.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joel.
Oh no! I was just gonna say
that sequence is amazing. It's amazing.
All of that being, I mean,
it's goofy and silly,
but it is.
But it's incredible.
Yeah, and it's that pullback sequence alone is worth talking about.
Just the idea of that, just that he thought that up.
Yep.
And then did it somehow.
Yeah.
But it's also the fact that when you do start, you pull back and you have that moment of anticipation of what the hell is this? And then when you start to see shapes and forms and a little bit of light, I think it's a moment of
it goes on forever.
And within the film itself, like I don't know what the hell is coming. I don't know what is going on. And then when you see those two trailing lights or whatever, it's not
zoom back. I believe all it is it's a hard. They're clearly zoomed in on him because he's extremely grainy and deteriorated. Yeah. So he's not only is he an optical effect in all likelihood, but he's he's a long ways away from where the camera is, and he's blown up so that they can unblow it up, plus pull back, plus pan back, plus move the camera back into some little foreground miniature, and then put little lights on it, and then move all the way back into it. But it's movie magic to me. And it's not just that, it's the setup. It's what happens immediately after that. That whole sequence just is magical. I adore it.
And I got to give that shout out back to Tangerine Dream again, because watching it the other night, just to revisit the sequence, I'm like, it's so...
They disowned it too. There's never been a soundtrack to The Keep. Michael Mann used David Byrne and Brian Eno, and he patched together a whole bunch of different stuff like he normally does. And in doing so, he eliminated a bunch of their score. In fact, that sequence of the guys running in the long coats, that's a song that was from the temp track. They wrote a song for that, and he didn't use it. He used a song from their earlier album that you can buy.
Interesting.
Wow.
Instead, and so most of their score hit the cutting room floor, even though the majority of what you hear is in fact Tangerine Dream.
Wow.
So they disowned it too, and they didn't release it, and never released it, and never released anything from it. There were only ever bootlegs of it, and the bootlegs that you got didn't sound like the movie because they weren't ideas from the film. They were the stuff that they wrote for the film, some of which you recognized. So there never was a proper release of it. In fact, one of the excuses they used for years was the music rights are scattered and it's too difficult. But that's not the problem anymore.
Wow.
I mean, do you think that's part of a film like The Keep's appeal, is that it is so hard to find and any, accoutrements for its release? Like, is that, you think that
it helps its legend? It's a cult movie, and the cultier, the better in that case. So yeah, you bet. You feel like it's your own little treasure, and when you break it out for a horror fan in the middle of the night, he hasn't seen it and didn't even know what it is. It's an exciting moment. But that's when I was a kid. Now that I'm grown up, I would never foist The Keep on somebody without a keep length warning ahead of the film, because.
But I think it's funny though, because I want to say I haven't seen it since you showed me. It feels like it's been that long, because there are images that still stick with me, so certainly the creature and everything, but the fact that sequence, as soon as you said that was going to be like, okay, I'm on board, because I so vividly remember that moment that I already described it. So that is what stuck with me with that film. That, and like you said, the cover art, it's still lingering.
It's a fantastic movie poster, and it's a shame should they ever use anything else for any sort of advertising other than that image. That's just awesome.
Yep.
I don't know who designed it. There's a decent scan out there on the internet with somebody signed their name. Some movie poster expert can tell us. It was one of those guys making all the cool 80s posters. I don't know which one. Keep is awesome, but it's also really awful. Just a warning.
I love that you called this one out, Ryan. I think it was a brilliant call.
Well, because I think it's brilliant, and because I get excited when I talk about it. That's what I wanted this to be.
So for my film, the two things that I love that scare me the most, especially in films, is a good hallway, and when the
hallways are scary.
Yeah, and when the camera doesn't move. I absolutely I immediately get put into that. It's why like found footage films tend to work for me a lot of times, especially if it's and that they're not always static camera, but it's that feeling, it's that POV feeling, and especially where you're feeling
the camera knows something you don't. You're supposed to be seeing something, and you're looking for it desperately. And and the longer you don't see it, and if you never see it, it causes stress. It really does.
It's the shot in Rosemary's Baby when Ruth, I think it's Ruth Gordon that goes to the bed to make the phone call after she says that she's pregnant, and you can't see it, and and you're like, what? You're trying to look around the corner.
Can I give a quick shout out to the movie I think that's the most brilliant at this sort of thing is Klute.
Yeah.
But by Alan Pakula, who we love for All the King's Men,
Mhm.
and or is that right? Yes.
Yeah.
And Clute, and it was directed by Gordon Willis, was the photographer on it, the guy who did The Godfather and a handful of other things. The other movie that I really love is also the two of them. It's Parallax View. But Clute, it uses the full frame and it leaves entire parts of it empty. And we talked about Halloween. That's certainly the horror movie that does it better than any other.
Yeah.
That emptiness, stillness, and making the movement count, it's so incredible, and I love it. And include its darkness too. And the movie you're going to mention now does it masterfully.
Yeah, it's The Exorcist 3. And it's the nurse hallway scene. It's the greatest.
A good deal of that movie takes place in this hospital where they're doing this investigation.
And yeah, so it like about 2/3 of the way through the film, every murder that has happened, every killing that has happened in that film, we've never seen. We don't actually see anything.
It's like Seven. It's all forensic, which is frankly scarier because you have to imagine what happened.
Yeah,
and that's always
it's all after the fact, and and it's all what is discussed by George C. Scott and whoever's telling him about what happened. But then
what did not happen.
Yeah. And then about 2/3 of the way, you just get this long hallway shot. The camera is just put at the end of the hallway, and you see, and on I guess for the purposes of on this side of the screen,
for you in radio land, you'll just have to pick
the left
side.
Yeah. You see doors leading to rooms. At the far end, you see this woman, this nurse, who's wearing a nice bright red sweater over her nurse's uniform. You just see her at work, and you see police officers who are there as security, and you just see them. And I love the choreography of the scene where the police officers are very naturally kind of coming and going as they're like, oh, I'm going to go check this room, or I got to go do this, or I'm kind of on a break, so I'm just going to sit down and read the paper. Yeah, have a cup of coffee, chat with the nurse a little bit. And then and the door that is closest to camera is slightly open. And and then you hear, it's got great audio because you hear just this weird kind of unknowable, you have no idea what it is, noise. Yeah, a little. And then and she of course comes walking down the hall, and the entire time the camera is not moving. And then you get a break as she goes into this room where she hears the noise, and it does cut to her going in there, and you get the great horror movie false scare in the clinking of ice. You find out, oh, that noise is ice melting and kind of clinking on each other. You get another great jump scare there with a dude sleeping, and then it cuts back to that hallway. And you're like, okay, what is going on here? It's like this, and you're not
happy to see that hallway.
No, you're
again,
not happy
at all.
No.
At all. It's not cool that you're looking at that scene.
Yeah, and you are, and as the viewer, and one of the things and why it's so effective for me is because of that's the view. You are trapped. You cannot move.
Right.
You are paralyzed to what is going to happen here. There is no way you can move away from it. And so, yeah. And then it goes, and she goes back to work, and it's just that tension is just ratcheting up. It's like the hallway scene in The Shining where Danny's riding his big wheel through, and the camera's moving with him. It's the same way that's ratcheting tension up by following him.
Yeah,
riding around, but it's the flipped opposite of just this camera sitting there doing nothing, and then she's going about her business, and the police officers, and every time a cop comes back, you're just like, oh, surely nothing can happen now. The police are there, or even if you don't want to assign it to the police as a calming presence, another person is there.
Yeah.
Right.
And, and rarely do things happen when there's someone to witness it, especially in a murder.
Especially when we haven't witnessed anything.
Yeah, when we haven't.
And even this, we don't witness much of it. We just know what happens. I really believe, and you can argue with me, there's some great ones in cinema, but I believe it's the best jump scare in all of.
Oh, to me, that's why. Yeah, that's why. Ultimately, because it's got the two things that scare me the most in movies: is a long hallway, and a static camera. So yeah, then she just goes and checks on another room, and
making her rounds,
and then she closes the door behind her and turns and walks away, and you get this amazing, masterful thing that comes out.
Something in a hospital gown.
Yeah.
Some
Well, it looks
figure
almost like a
that
hazmat suit, like because they're head to toe covered.
It is kind of.
Yeah. And just, you don't know if it's arms out. You discover later what is up, but it's like, it's a big giant scissors. But and it's just like it comes out after her. She's oblivious. The nurse is oblivious to this thing coming after her. Has no idea.
That's what's so masterful, because I like the fact that we don't see what's off where that figure comes from. But we've kind of seen the space in earlier shots. I don't think it's an infinite space. So the fact that this person comes out of somewhere where any of these people wandering in real life would be able to see someone hiding or standing there, and the fact that they don't is just wrong. I'm like, this is not cool. Yeah.
And you don't trust the movie at all before it lands that, and it gets you anyway. And that's, we can talk about all the things that are masterfully crafted about it, but something about it reaches beyond that, and it just captures some carnal other thing that you can't easily put a stamp on, that makes it work like gangbusters, where similar sequences work to varying degrees of
But I think
success.
That's why it is successful, because there is no reasonable explanation for anything you're seeing. Right. It doesn't make sense. But within, of course, the world created it. Okay, I'll buy it. Yeah. But physically, it doesn't make sense.
And it takes its time. It takes its time. It makes you like, you're like, come on, can't we just get going? What is going on? Let's just get to the next. Why am I still stuck here with everything that's just moving slowly? What is going on? What is happening?
Masterful. William Peter Blatty's second movie, I believe.
Yeah.
And he then what I was gonna say is the Exorcist TV show. When I was doing some reading after I knew I was going to talk about this scene, the Exorcist, short-lived. I never watched it.
2 seasons, I think.
2 seasons, but they essentially tried to recreate this scene in an episode.
Whoops.
Well, it's
as if you weren't a stupid enough idea.
Well, it's clearly an homage. It's clearly a.
I get it. They weren't hiding anything.
Yeah, as soon as you're watching it, and suddenly, but the whole sequence is only about 25 to 30 seconds long.
Gotta sell those.
It happens, and it's just too. It's you don't get the payoff doesn't land nearly as much, because you have obviously, first of all, you're like, oh, I see what you're doing here,
right?
But also there's just there's no time for it to have gotten you, to hook you in, as to make you go, what the heck is going on? Haunting
of Hill House on Netflix. If you really like that kind of thing, watch that. It's
exactly why I haven't watched it.
It requires your patience. It demands your patience, and that's why it works so well.
Yeah, it's got
maybe not perfectly, but for horror television, it's as good as it gets.
Something that Ryan said earlier, and what Joel, you touched on as well, is the fact that you go back to the hallway after those cutaways. And I think that what is so great about that,
giving you relief, and then it takes it away.
I think Blatty and his DP were working off the fact that audiences are semi-smart. Right. It's like, once they have that scare with the guy in the bed in the room, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
But the fact that you return to that hallway, I think that's the point where any audience is like, hold on.
Yeah. Wait,
And not to the hallway,
again.
but that exact same static spot that you've been watching for whatever.
I think that's what's so great about it, because, Blatty was playing on your expectation as a horror audience. Like, he's like, okay, you got the scare. People are like, oh, okay, moving on. Oh, no. We're going to go back here. And so, because, you're having that relief and you're thinking, okay, we're done. But I think that's what's so magical about it. Oh, no, we're not through with you here.
Yeah, it's
The good ones.
It never ceases to make me just go, huh, even after I've seen it in
It's a good one.
Times,
it's pure visual cinema, but filmed by a guy who is known for being a writer.
Yeah,
it's an incredible accomplishment by him. That movie again was compromised. The movie itself is very underrated, but only because it was considered really bad when it came out, and it was never really bad.
Well,
it just didn't have a kid spitting up pea soup, and it didn't have all the Exorcist cliches that you needed to have to slap that name on something.
Because it's. I mean, as I was, I haven't seen this movie, but he had made another. Essentially, Exorcist 3 was a sequel to a different movie he had made that wasn't part of the Exorcist trilogy.
It would only been the ninth configuration.
Right? That's exactly what it is. Yeah, that's what he essentially
was a sequel to the ninth configuration.
Well, in
go back a couple episodes. We have a big long talk about that weird movie.
Yeah, but he's essentially, it's that style. It's that mystery thriller whodunit horror film.
Right.
And that
he didn't want to have any exorcism in it. They made him reshoot the entire ending of the film to be an Exorcist movie.
Yep. And
I just read the source material for the first. I read Legion in December. And so I actually revisited the film maybe a few months ago. I actually sat and watched the whole thing. So it's pretty fresh in my mind. So when Joel, you mentioned that, I'm like, okay, I'm on this. Apparently
Legion's a good book, right? It's just not this. It's his movie is only an adaptation of the book for about the first 2/3, and then it changes.
Well, but it's definitely related. I mean, Kinderman is the same character.
Right. No, I get it.
Bob played in the original film. So.
Yep.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of call-outs that I think in both of them, but
apparently there is a.
But Blatty wrote a sequel to his own book, The Exorcist, and then adapted that as a director into Exorcist 3.
Yeah.
And it should have been called Legion with these callbacks. Instead, because it was Exorcist 3, they foisted a big Exorcist finale on him that the book doesn't have. Basically all I'm saying.
Apparently there is
they shot the whole thing. They shot the regular version of the movie.
Yeah, and some of that footage apparently
Shout Factory has the Blu-ray.
Yeah, and there's a version of it out there that they're calling The Exorcist 3: Legion.
Legion, yeah.
But then apparently I think it was like a year ago, Blatty's wife said that a director's cut will be coming of.
I read that too.
Yeah, so possibly there'll be we'll get to see sort of this a full.
You'll have 3 different versions of it, and 2 different versions of Exorcist 2, and 2 different versions of The Exorcist. Yay!
There you go.
It is not in the file. It is not.
It is not.
So what do you guys think is what do horror movies and our love of horror movies and why we watch movies, what do you think that says about us as a briefly as a society, as a species? We're the only species that loves to intentionally scare ourselves. Michael, what do you think?
I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the fact that it's a release and it is a way to face danger and release that tension out of your body by not actually being in physical danger. I guess I kind of subscribe to that because, it's true. I mean, there's a release. It gets rid of negative energy.
That's why I like the ones I like, because it scrapes at some part of you that you don't really have access to without that help, or that hopefully you don't. That sense of panic and and fear and dread. Dread is an important part of it. Like Joel, you didn't use the word, but dread. It's just
dread.
Full of dread. Even the first 4 or 5 minutes of the beginning of Dawn of the Dead, nothing happens, but it's just
you feel it.
Dread.
Yeah.
You know, you get to feel those in a you get to experience crazy things, just like you get to experience the Great Wall of China, or you get to experience the Middle Ages. You get to experience something that you don't actually want to experience. You know, that's the magic of movies and storytelling. If you really just want to jump, I've said this before, where the horror movies that are not for me guaranteed are the ones where the advertising shows night vision of the audience jumping into each other's laps and popcorn flying when something happens. That makes you the audience, instead of somebody who's trapped and forced to empathize with the situation. It turns you into the killer, essentially. These people are only dying because you're in the audience and you paid a ticket to show up and see it. The Saw movies are like that. The Scream movies are like that. And these movies all have different varying degrees of technical merit and decent or bad storytelling. But the ones that are on the killer's side in that way, I can't get on board with. I don't hate them all, but I typically don't like slasher movies. I don't show up to them to have that kind of experience. I want it to be more like Hereditary. I want to feel awful because you should feel awful. The more they do that, the more weird and magical and the more unsettling or original they are, the more I like them.
There are places for those kind of movies, and I certainly enjoy them to an extent, but I agree with you. It's like I want to go on a journey with a particular person. I mean, in my own writing, if I don't care about the character, then something's wrong. You've failed. Unless you're writing something that's supposed to be maybe a little more shallow or
an anti-hero or something. You don't have to root for the character, but you still have to some part of your empathy has to be engaged, or you're just
you have to connect, and then everything that comes, otherwise it's useless. That you got to care. And I said that in a million reviews too. It's like, I don't care, so your movie failed.
You failed. All right. Well, thank you, Michael. My goodness, thank you so much for joining us on the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Real quick, if you want to reach out to us, if you have thoughts on Hereditary, on The Keep, on Dawn of the Dead, the remake, on The Exorcist 3, if you have thoughts on spectacular sequences, you can reach out to us at the Movie Show page on Facebook and at Ask Joel and Ryan on Twitter and Instagram, and the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page on YouTube, where if you are watching this, that is where you can find more of these and see our lovely faces. Or if you're listening to us and want to see our lovely faces,
if we can come up with decent enough quality, maybe we'll slap these sequences in a playlist. But Michael and mine is an inciting incident. Michael's is an intro and exposition. It's an amazing one, but it's pretty harmless. You've got the whole movie left to go. Joel's is a massive spoiler, but then if you listen to the show, we've already sort of spoiled it.
I didn't even spoiler alert it.
Well, there's a lot of good stuff in Exorcist 3, but that's the thing.
Yeah. But if we find good enough quality copies, we'll make a playlist. I believe I've created a folder in there called Stuff We Reference. And
classy.
But you can reach out to us and at ask Joel and Ryan at gmail.com. So so once again, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. Well, thank you, Ryan.
No problem.
Being my partner in this journey. But of course, thank you, Michael, for joining us today.
Thank you guys for having me on. I'm really happy that you called me.
I knew ahead of time that this was just going to be a long episode because you can't get the three of us in a room without it taking.
We'll do more.
But
then we can keep them shorter.
Yep, we can definitely have Michael.
Maybe.
I would love to come back. I accept your invitation.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you next week. But thank you all so much. Thank you, listener, for letting us into your ears. And if you were watching this, into your eyes. for another week. And as always, we want you to be kind to each other out there. It's been a crazy time, so be kind to yourselves, be kind to one another. Yeah, I think that's going to do it for this week. So what do you say,
See ya.
Ryan? See ya. See ya, everybody.
So long. Don't take any wooden nickels.
Don't leave your bedroom door unlocked for zombie children.
Don't let self-doubt interfere with your plans to improve your life.
That's right.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.
You wanted to know about the man in cell 11.
Stretch your memory. What was he wearing when they brought him in? Do you recall?
That was quite some time ago.
Was he dressed like a priest?
Like a priest?
Were there any signs of injuries? Blood, lacerations?
That would be in the file.
It is not in the file!